the Quran, it clearly states that if one kills an innocent person, it's as if they've killed the whole of humanity. Murder is completely forbidden.
Ah, the Quran says murder is completely forbidden. Well, we need to go and read the Quran, guys, because we need to understand this. I mean, what would I know? I'm just a stupid atheist, and I live my life not knowing anything about religion, clearly. So let's go to the verse she's referencing and see if we can wrap our heads around this. Surah 5, verse 32. This seems very familiar, actually. It's like I've read this to you guys before. Firstly, you'll notice that this verse has a broader context. It's recounting something that was said to Jews. But this woman insists that this verse outlines a law for Muslims. So let's go by that assumption. From this verse, she somehow jumped to murder is completely forbidden. Little bit off. Whoever kills a soul, unless for a soul or for corruption done in the land, it is as if he has slain mankind entirely. Now the Quran makes it very clear what's considered corruption or mischief in Islam. Any act not complying with sharia is viewed as corruption in Islam. Meaning that this verse would actually be advocating blasphemy killings. You sure you still want to say that this is Islamic law? Because corruption in Islam is being gay. It's being a skeptic, denying or criticizing Islam. It's apostatizing. Muhammad on multiple occasions said to kill anyone who tries to leave Islam. It's funny how she went to extra effort to leave out this unless part in the middle. Oh, and this verse that she misquotes to say that murder is completely forbidden, what's the very next verse after this one say again? Oh yes, that's right. Surah 5 verse 33. Indeed, the penalty for those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive upon the earth to cause corruption is none but they be killed or crucified or that their hands and feet be cut off from opposite sides. That doesn't sound very peaceful. You know what? That's obviously a bad translation. All these translations are bad translations. What must have happened here is that all these translations have mistaken the Arabic words for hug and love with kill and crucify.
It's about mercy, it's about kindness.
I'm sure you've guessed the subject this video is going to center around. We're talking about sharia. Now, the thing to understand about sharia is it takes many different forms, kind of like cancer. Speaking of cancer, this woman's name is Yassmin Abdel Magied, an Islamist, an advocate for theocracy, and someone who regularly appears on Q&A. Now, she got into a bit of a debate with an Australian politician, Jackie Lambie. Actually, I can't do an impression of Jackie Lambie, my voice doesn't go low enough. But Jackie Lambie is barely competent when it comes to discussing Islam. In fact, she's not really competent. I don't think she's ever looked at Islamic texts, probably not very knowledgeable about Muhammad, and ultimately not very good at articulating her ideas in the first place. She probably performs a bit better than Pauline Hanson, but that's not saying much.
Anybody that supports Sharia law in this country should be deported.
So do you know what Sharia law is?
I do, and so do some of Yassmin's friends, but we'll get to that in a bit. It's law based on the teachings of Muhammad. His followers believed that the punishments outlined and the values came straight from God. Millions upon millions of innocent people have been killed and persecuted in the name of this law that a bunch of morons believe they need to enforce because of some ridiculous stories about a god who they just happen to be taught to believe in based on where they were born and the utterly insignificant in the grand scheme of things time period that they're in. Countries that enforce Sharia are the worst countries in the world to live in terms of human rights. And the best countries in the world to live in reject theocracy. And so it fails purely based on that, because it's religious law and secularism is non-negotiable.
Yes, but it doesn't have
do you know what it is?
Me praying five Sharia law?
Of course, me praying 5 times a day is Sharia.
Okay.
Right? Like basic...
What about the equal rights for women? What about...
That is completely separate from Islam.
So now you can be...
That is completely separate from Islam. Yes, women's rights and Islam do tend to be pretty much mutually exclusive. But what she's trying to do here is completely sidestep the issue of women's rights in Islam.
So now you can be a Sharia law supporter and be half pregnant at the same time. Come on.
See, this whole exchange is a frustrating mess. It gets derailed even further when Jackie Lambie makes a comment that I can't even make sense of. Not to be outdone though, Yassmin Abdel Magied comes back with this.
Excuse me, Islam to me is the most feminist religion. Right? We got equal...
Yeah, do you hear that laughter? That's because what you just said is probably one of the most delusional things that anyone's said on that show in a while. And for a show like Q&A, that's saying something. Do I need to remind you that the founder of your religion endorsed wife-beating, sex slaves, and general inequality under law?
Right? We got equal rights well before the Europeans.
When she says we, she's talking about women in Islamic countries. Which ones, I wonder? Well, I hear she's Sudanese, so maybe she's talking about Sudan. Let's go look at Sudan. Oh, in Sudan, women are required by law to wear conservative religious clothing and can face violent punishments like lashing if they don't comply. Are these the women you're speaking for, Yassmin? What about women in Iran? What about women in Saudi Arabia, the heartland of Islam? What Islamic countries are you talking about exactly? I'm sure all the women who have suffered under Sharia would be glad to know that some spoiled brat in one of the best countries in the world is telling everyone how they got their equal rights before the Europeans, and it's thanks to Sharia.
We don't take our husbands' last names because we ain't their property.
The implication there being that women in the West have to take their husbands' names. They don't. That's a garbage point.
Right? We were given the right to own land. We the fact is, what is culture is separate from what is faith. And the fact that people go around dissing my faith without knowing anything about it...
She's getting mad now because people be dissing her Sharia and she don't like that. If you disagree with it, it's because you don't understand it. See, the requirement for understanding Sharia is agreeing with it.
And want to chuck me out of a country...
I don't. I want your terrible ideas exposed and for everyone to see you for the religious zealot you are.
I have done... And Muslims... The fact is, Jackie, I agree.
The fact is, we have one law in this country and it is the Australian law. It's not Sharia law.
In Islam.
Not in this country.
Do you know what
Not in my day.
In Sharia, it says you follow the law of the land on which you are on.
And here we are. We've finally reached the peak of stupidity. You only need to think about her claim for a few seconds before you realise how self-defeating it is. She wants you to think that Sharia is this thing that's so versatile and malleable to the point of it being completely meaningless and serving no purpose. If Sharia really was about following the law of the land, then there would be no point in it existing. She just wants to muddy the waters as much as possible in the hope that ignorant morons might think that Sharia is this vague thing that's not enforceable. Yet Muhammad himself clearly outlined legislation, punishments that are enforceable. You will not find this definition of Sharia being taught anywhere by any Muslim scholars. They all agree that Sharia has values and is enforceable. And then you have Yassmin over here.
Sharia allows for multiple interpretations to exist at the same time. It's like water. It'll fill the vessel that it's in, right? And it's dynamic and fluid and open to interpretation.
Notice also how she contradicts herself. She alternates between saying that Sharia is this vague thing that's open to interpretation, and then telling us what Sharia is and isn't.
Some countries do force women, but that's not Sharia.
Well, surely it is Sharia, right? Because Sharia has no real values because it's about following the law of the land. And Sharia can't be about praying 5 times a day, as you say, because if the law of the land says that you can't pray 5 times a day, then not praying 5 times a day is Sharia, right? And why are Islamist groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir demanding Sharia in Australia? Surely they already have Sharia because it's essentially the law of the land. I wonder what they think of this. The sisters' arguments were indeed problematic, but the bigger problem was to accept to speak within such narrow confines in the first place was always set up for failure. I think she should have known better than to speak of things she apparently possesses little knowledge of. Wait a minute, is this... That can't be. That can't be Yassmin seeking advice from an Islamist sympathetic with ISIS who wants a caliphate governed by Sharia. Just a quick reminder of who this guy is.
I'll say very clearly.
Why will you not point blank condemn the actions of IS
because
fighters?
The question itself is
Men
offensive.
who cut me ask you
My message is this is where the discussion needs to be.
Will you take this opportunity now to urge young Muslim men here in Australia not to join Islamic State fighters in Iraq and
answer
Syria?
in the exact same way. The war on terror narrative works in this way. It presents the West as the good guy and Muslims as the bad guy.
What will the Australian public make of the fact that you will not sit here and tell your fellow Muslim men not to join Islamic State fighters in Iraq and Syria?
Well, we need to read this. Hold on, we need some nice bossa nova music in the background to accompany Islamism, like in Yassmin's little BuzzFeed style video. Salams. Well, I'm always happy to take feedback. What specifically was problematic and how can I do better in the future? Inshallah. I am young and willing to learn. Inshallah. Trying to do the best with the platform I can. Allah willing. First of all, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for your tireless efforts. Not an easy task, but you consistently do so with grace and humility and courage. Now, lol. In a nutshell, you've ended up framing Islam through a secular lens, aimed at a secular people, and conscious of the presence of a secular government. The end result was always going to be ugly. Ah, indeed. Sigh. This is always a tricky one. We'll DM you. Smiley face. That is how Islamic fanatics talk. Inshallah, inshallah, after every sentence, bitching about secularism. I want to be clear, this guy is in favour of enforcing sharia, as it is in many Islamic countries, bringing about a fascist, theocratic law system. And so Yassmin seemed so confident when she was telling us that this is not sharia, that sharia is really just this thing that no one really understands and it's so vague, but it's not a law system, it's not enforceable. And here we see her saying, oh, sorry, I'm young, I can learn, teach me your ways, master. Kind of makes her seem like a liar who will just say anything she can in an effort to promote Islam, even though deep down she knows she's out of her depth and has no idea what she's talking about. These guys, as you'd expect from anyone who wants to bring about a caliphate, are incredibly homophobic, misogynistic, they're against women having freedom from Islam, and so you'd expect someone who the ABC promotes as this moderate Muslim, and who tells us Sharia is this harmless thing that's whatever wonderful things you want it to say, no, what you promote is not Sharia, I am disgusted by you. Not to seek advice from them and act like a little schoolgirl who's talking to someone they admire. If you're someone who's defending or promoting this person because you've been led to believe that it's the progressive thing to do, you have been a moron. You have been played by an amateur, shit-tier Islamic apologist, not even a good one. You are regressive, and you've given regular people who actually care about progress no choice but to be anti-you, because what you're promoting is anti-us. But it's not too late for you. All you have to do is stop promoting apologists for backwards theocracy, people who wish to sidestep the issue of women's rights and gay rights, who want to make excuses and paint literally the most oppressive law system on earth today in a positive light. If you could just cut this crap out, drop identity politics, it's a lost cause and it's rooted in irrational racism anyway, adopt a bit of skepticism again, that'd be great. Real progressives would be happy to have you. Championing obvious liars will never help your cause. Stop it.